Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Art of Adaptation. So last week I was a little frustrated with the work I was analyzing and promised to come back with something nice for this week. So this week we're going to be talking about Overwatch, which is an interesting case study in how to use tie-in material, as well as an interesting glimpse into post-internet multimedia storytelling and brand management. Specifically, we're going to focus on how Blizzard did this in the animated short film The Last Bastion. But before we get into this, let's go over the basics. So for those of you who have other things to worry about, let's figure out what Overwatch is. Well, the simplest answer is, it's a video game. But if we want it to be a little more specific, it's a class-based online multiplayer first-person shooter. For those of you who aren't brushed up on all your video game jargon, here's what all that means. A first-person shooter is a game type where you use firearms or other forms of ranged weapons to do battle from behind our player character's eyes. Being an online multiplayer game means people play with and or against each other through the internet. And perhaps most importantly, being class-based means the players take on roles with specific enumerated abilities and implied responsibilities. The reason why I say it's important is that the classes available to you in Overwatch are actually the characters of its story. And as I said in my discussion of a hypothetical Metroid movie, people tend to get attached to characters more than themes and stories. Overwatch takes advantage of and relies heavily upon this paradigm. We can see this in the characters present in the game, all of which are very highly polished. The reason why I say that Overwatch relies heavily on people's love for its characters is the fact that the game's plot doesn't really exist. What we really have is a lot of setup and world building, at least as I'm writing this, and a lot of the more important details are given to us in tie-in materials. The game takes place in the aftermath of a Terminator-style machine uprising, but notably in this story the machines are beaten by the eponymous Overwatch organization. The game takes place quite a while after this Omnic crisis, because the robots are called Omnics in this world. Overwatch has been disbanded under less than happy circumstances, but when bad guys called Talon start doing bad guy things, it's up to Overwatch to get the band back together and save the world from whatever thing Talon is trying to do. Another thing to note is the fact that after the crisis, Omnics are still around. And the biggest issue this world seems to face is the question of how and if Omnics can be more than just machines, and whether or not Omnics and humans can live in an integrated and peaceful society. So today we're going to look at the Last Bastion short Blizzard made to explore the character Bastion, and how they used this short and this character to build their world and themes. So without further ado, let's begin. So in the short itself, not a lot happens. If you want to watch it, it's actually available on YouTube. I'll put a link in the video description. Okay, you watched it? Good. So the short can be divided into two sections, separated by Bastion's first freakout. Both provide important but distinct information from each other, and the interplay between these pieces of information, for lack of a better term, flesh out Bastion to an impressive degree. Now, if you play the game or see a picture of Bastion, one of the first questions you're likely to have is, what's up with the bird? The short shows us that the bird, whose name is Ganymede, is the thing that wakes Bastion up, and the two befriend each other. But more interestingly, the short really digs into Bastion's personality. It uses a lot of techniques to communicate Bastion's innocence. Just look at the gauzy, soft lighting and listen to the calm, childlike music in the first half. Additionally, notice how Bastion's main cannon, the one on its back, spends the first half completely encased in plants. Plus, go back and watch Bastion's shocked reaction when Ganymede eats an inchworm. This stands in stark contrast to one of the first pieces of information the short puts in its audience's head. The fact that Bastion's right hand, the one we think of culturally and for many of us individually as the dominant primary hand, is a gun. And not in the same way Mega Man has an arm cannon where it starts out as a hand and turns into a gun. This contradiction quickly communicates the idea that Bastion is growing past its original programming and purpose. Now, the most common reading of Bastion's character since this short was released is that Bastion suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's almost certainly the intended reading and an extremely valid one. After all, we see Bastion have a panic attack and have a flashback. Not to mention we see Ganymede acting as its support animal. But in some ways, the short is too ambiguous to have a definitive reading. And this ambiguity is actually utilized to help build the world, because at no point are we privy to Bastion's internal thought process or motivation. For instance, the moment where Bastion's light turns red and it starts marching towards the city. It's unclear if it's doing this because it's angry about all the destroyed Bastion units, or if its original programming just kicked in and now it's just following orders. This is important because this establishes Bastion as being in a sort of limbo of personhood. Now, personhood is a very deep, very complicated philosophical construct, but here's what's important in this context. This ambiguity, combined with choices like not giving Bastion a face, establish it as being more than just a machine, but not quite on the same level as its contemporaries, Zenyatta and Orisa. This concept is very abstract and esoteric, but is vital to understanding the Omnic crisis and its aftermath, especially from an Omnic's perspective, which is vital if the Omnics are going to be presented as a persecuted minority, which they are. But through Bastion, especially in this short, this critical element of Overwatch's world is communicated as an easily understood and poignant bit of character drama. So if you go over to Overwatch's YouTube channel, you'll notice not every character has been given an animated short. So the question becomes, why give one to Bastion? After all, while it might be one of my favorite characters, it's not like Bastion is excessively popular. And there are other Omnic characters who could provide this same vital perspective. Well, part of it is that Bastion kind of needs it the most. Its design undercuts a lot of the tools the game uses to build its characters. For instance, the animation. The game takes excellent advantage of the opportunities provided by both first and third person animation in order to build character. But Bastion's clunky design somewhat limits its articulation. And on top of that, Bastion doesn't have the ability to emote through facial expressions. Now, they did a good job on Bastion, but compare this to Orisa and just how much of her personality they could communicate through just her eyes. Additionally, Bastion lacks a voice. It does communicate a decent amount through the whirring noises it makes, but we don't get any real specifics. The biggest loss comes in the banter system. During the start of the game, characters have a chance to offer a few lines of banter back and forth. This can build a lot of character. But because of Bastion's lack of a voice, most of the banter tells us more about whoever Bastion is talking to than Bastion itself. The greater degree of control the short film format provides is basically necessary to communicate anything of substance about Bastion. We'll likely see more cross-medium franchise building exercises like this in the future, so analyzing why certain attempts work is going to be vital going forward. And so far, Overwatch has been a pretty resounding success, so let's hope we see more things like this in the future. See you guys next time.